Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight we have exclusive new footage to show you from the mass shooting in Las Vegas last month. The tape was given to us by a lawyer who represents several shooting victims. None of this has been shown in public before. The footage has no audio. It was taken from a surveillance camera of a local business. It monitored the parking lot very near the concert site. You'll notice as you look at it that the tape has the date October 2nd burned into it. The shooting, of course, occurred on October 1st. That discrepancy is the result of human error. When the camera was set up, it had the wrong date and nobody ever fixed it. But we are confident this was shot that night, October 1st. Now, the first notable development on the tape comes at 10:06. That's about 1 minute into Stephen Paddock's shooting spree, according to the timeline we now have. We see concert-goers running through the parking lot to safety in the foreground. At 10:14, much larger crowds of people come streaming through the area to escape the massacre going on. You can see a large amount of wind and debris. Apparently, that's due to a helicopter hovering overhead. At 10:16, two men drag what appears to be a fallen victim into the parking lot. They try to give medical assistance to the person, but then realize apparently that it's no use, and they sit with the body while other people continue to flee right past them. Later, at 10:24 p.m., one of the men places his shirt across the victim's face, and then at 10:32, a man puts what appears to be a blanket or a towel over the body, having given up hope. Police only arrive in this area for the first time at around 10:45 p.m. The body is still there. As of 11:50, when a pickup truck finally comes and takes it away, the body lay there. All of it's interesting, of course, and it's horrifying to see it. The question is, does it have implications for the ongoing investigation? We don't know at this point. But here is what is interesting, undoubtedly. The business owner who possesses this tape tells us that no law enforcement officer or government investigator has ever seen the video or even asked to see it. In fact, his only interaction with investigators was one time when they marked where a bullet hit his garage door. Think about that for a minute. It's amazing. It's remarkable, actually. Here you have the deadliest shooting in American history, modern American history. We still have no clear motive. We have no clear timeline of what happened and when. And there are, of course, countless unanswered questions. You'd think investigators would be gathering all the evidence they possibly could. Instead, they seem to be overlooking some of it, including this. Why is that exactly? Catherine Lombardo is a lawyer. She represents victims of the Las Vegas shooting, and she joins us tonight. Catherine, thanks for coming on. Tell us first where this tape comes from.
A gentleman named Mike Turber, who is not an investigator or a reporter, brought it to me. Now, I've spoken with so many people who were at the concert that night, and I represent, of course, my law firm represents many people, and we filed the first lawsuit in Los Angeles County in Los Angeles because Live Nation Entertainment is domiciled in Beverly Hills. Now, people have been coming to me, and I've met with so many people and spoken with so many of the victims who were there that night. People have been coming to me and bringing me pictures and videos. So it wasn't surprising that this gentleman contacted me and brought me this video. I thought it was very telling. We do not know who the deceased is in the video. We would love for any witnesses or victims or people who were there to continue to come forward to me to bring me the information that they have. These people have
wait, I'm sorry. So you're a lawyer, you're a private attorney representing clients in a lawsuit here. Shouldn't people be bringing that evidence, those data, to investigators to try and figure out what happened?
Let me explain that, okay? The investigators, although they are doing a fantastic job, I'm sure, they've gone radio silent. So we have no information from them, and we expect it to take probably about 6 months for that investigation to be completed. In the meantime, just like in any civil lawsuit that I prosecute, any litigation, I have to conduct my own investigation to prove the case. And in this case, not only do I have to prove and conduct my own investigation, but I have several clients who are suffering from such deep trauma, and one of the things that they want from me is answers. They want answers.
Well,
so
sure, but by the way, this is not a criticism of your behavior. You're doing what you're paid to do. But I would think that the people running the government investigation, state and federal authorities, would also want this information, and as much of it as they could get. They haven't contacted you?
They have not. I expect that after this airing, they will have this video, and I would love it if they did contact me. So my phone line is open, and I would love to hear from them.
Do you think that's odd? I mean, presumably you've been around in the periphery of criminal investigations before. When there are so many outstanding questions, wouldn't the FBI, for example, want to lay its hands on every available piece of surveillance tape that showed the events of that night?
After 26 years of being a lawyer in the criminal field, 25 of those, being a former police commissioner, former judge pro tem, having been a prosecutor and a defense attorney, I can tell you that in this particular case, this is unprecedented, and the authorities are probably overwhelmed. I don't know the state of their investigation. I'm assuming that they are overwhelmed and their resources cannot catch up with the needs of this investigation.
Yeah, apparently, or something. So
Right.
from the tape we just saw, the police, I think we said it began, the tape begins at 10:06, about a minute after the firing began. Police don't appear in the frame until about 45 minutes later, or after the hour. Is that an unusually long period of time?
Yes, it's about 2 hours, and the deceased was laying there. We believe it's a female. We would love to know who it is. So again, if any witnesses have anything, please call us. She was laying there. What your video doesn't show is that she was laying there alone for probably 40 or 45 minutes with no one at all. People kept coming and looking and running and coming and looking and walking away. That Ford Raptor truck came twice. First, it loaded up probably 10 to 15 people in the back of its truck to lead them to safety. Then it came back later with an officer in the bed with his gun drawn, and that's when they finally decided that they had the opportunity to load the victim up into the truck and take the victim to, I don't know where they took the victim.
So I don't know if you're going to know the answer to this question, but I think it's one of the major questions here. To what extent is MGM turning over all the information it has to investigators? It seems from our perspective in the press that they're managing a lot of the storyline here. Do you think that they're giving everything they have to investigators? Would you know that?
Managing the storyline is probably the best thing I've heard anybody say so far, Tucker. That's perfectly put. We've heard nothing from them. None of my clients have received an apology from them. Neither Mandalay Bay nor MGM have come forward, have contacted me. We have served them. We served them the day after we filed the lawsuit. We've not heard back. We've not heard word one from them yet. I expect that we will, although I should say that the MGM Corporate Counsel did meet with us. I actually walked the venue site myself 2 weeks ago per a court order that my legal team secured, and next week we'll be going into the room, the shooter's hotel suite, and the 32nd floor. So they are cooperating because the judge ordered them to, and so they are working with us on the parameters of those court orders.
Well, the rest of us are interested to hear what we learn here. Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Dan Bongino is a former NYPD officer and a Secret Service agent. He's been following this case since day one, and he joins us now. I'm a little bit surprised that, and look, I mean, I understand law enforcement, as you just heard the attorney say, is overwhelmed, and there's a lot of stuff to sift through, but it does seem a little strange that there would be a clear surveillance tape like this, and no one in authority from the FBI or local authorities is asked to see it.
Yeah, what I find really particularly strange, Tucker, is not that they don't have it, it's that they weren't asked for it, the owners of the tape.
Right.
You know, law enforcement not having it, there could be a multitude of reasons. The shop owner could have just been more comfortable handing it to someone he knew. I mean, that's perfectly explainable, may not make sense outside of law enforcement, but I've seen that happen. What's not explainable, however, is in one of the largest crime scenes in American history, having a homicide, Tucker, happen right in front of a camera. That's what happened. That person died and was killed. The fact that 50+ others were killed doesn't make that death any less relevant. That happened on a camera. And yet, for some unexplainable reason, that footage was not turned over. I mean, if that was an individual crime scene, Tucker, that one person, that is the single most valuable piece of information you just put on the air. Well, a video of the person actually dying. And it's just, I think, because of the... Can I just say one thing, Tucker? I think this is three things going on here, right? It's an overwhelmingly large crime scene. Now, that's not an excuse. Someone needs to ask for help then at this point.
But it's
Secondly, combine that with Yes, it's true. It's just ask for help if you can't handle it at this point, right? And they may. I don't know what's going on, to be fair. But secondly, you have a corporation concerned about lawsuits here. There's no question that I have to believe behind the scenes is not exactly being fully cooperative. That is, you combine those two factors with the fact that, again, you have one of the largest mass murders in American history and an enormous crime scene that's tough to grit out, and you have a nasty kind of witch's brew here going on.
It just was, I would just make 2 points. One, I think the FBI, based on a call I had today with someone out in Nevada, is actually driving this investigation. The Clark County Sheriff has been the public face with. The FBI is basically in charge. I just think it's very odd that here you had a lawyer for families of the victims soliciting pictures and video from the public and says she's received a bunch of it. And again, it sounds like the investigators, the FBI, don't have some of that material. I just think that is jaw-dropping.
And I think what's playing into this too, Tucker, is, and I'll give both sides. Just to be fair, the FBI's put up billboards. If you have this, call us. Someone may have missed that. I don't know. But again, if this was a standard crime scene, Tucker, here's how it would work. You would create your best evidence-free pathway you have. You would grid out the scene, if it was, say, a homicide in a house, and you would investigate every portion of that grid and take every piece of evidence. The problem they're having here, I think, and again, it's not an excuse. Listen, you need to fix this. This is one of the largest mass murders in American history. There is no room for error. Every eyeball's on you. The problem here is the scene is so overwhelming. I just think too many things are being missed, and it's leading to, as we've said many times before, talking about this case, a lot of people who are starting to ask a lot of questions and are starting to formulate their own theories about what happened. This has to be handled the right way.
It's going to have a lasting effect on people's trust in their government, in policing and in the administration of justice. There's a huge cost to this, I think. Dan, thank you for that.
And Tucker, really, yes, you absolutely, you got it.
Thanks, Dan. We'll continue to follow the Las Vegas investigation as it unfolds. Liberal America has decided that statues of Robert E. Lee, Thomas Jefferson, even George Washington are no longer allowed in public spaces. So who does deserve a statue? Washington, D.C., the city council here has a very surprising choice. We'll tell you whose statue is going up outside City Hall soon. That's next. In the past few months, America has become pretty strict about who is allowed to be honored with a statue. Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis statues have disappeared across the South. Teddy Roosevelt and Christopher Columbus are under siege in New York City. Thomas Jefferson under attack at the University of Virginia, the school he founded. But in some cities, they're putting up statues instead of tearing them down. Washington, D.C. is one of them. The city council here is planning to erect a Mayor Marion Barry statue. That's the same Marion Barry who once said Asians, quote, have dirty shops, need to get out of the city. The same Barry once caught smoking crack on camera in 1990 at the Vista Hotel. Garland Nixon is a radio show host, been around D.C. a long time. He thinks it's a great idea. Mr. Nixon, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
So I'll just admit it flat out. I knew Barry at dinner at my house. I thought he was a charming guy, interesting guy. I mean, I like Marion Barry, actually. Yeah. Worst mayor probably in the country, but also kind of like an open bigot, and would just sort of say it. I mean, in 2014, he said, and I'm quoting, "We got to do something about these Asians coming in, opening up businesses, those dirty shops, they ought to go." I wonder if you put up a Marion Barry statue, what Asian people driving by would think.
Well, there's a couple things. If you recall, though, that he was brought to task about that, and he discussed it, and he talked about the issue there was in the black community that a lot of black people didn't own.
Yeah, but he's still attacking a
and
racial
he came back
group.
And he apologized.
I mean, are we allowed to do that? I mean, that's your, come on, you can't do that. When he got reelected, I was living here when he did, and in 1994, he said famously, white people get over it. Like, you can't, come on now. He was a divisive figure on racial lines, and why would you ever want a statue of him?
I don't think he was a divisive figure on racial lines. He was the mayor at a time when there were a lot of divisive issues going on. But let's not forget, let's not just bottle this guy up based on a couple of statements that he made. Here was a guy who was the president of the Students Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the first president of SNCC. He was a guy, and you know what he did when he became became the president of SNCC, you know what he did? He had a master's degree in chemistry, and he was working on his PhD in organic chemistry, and he quit that in order to work for SNCC. He was
a smart guy. I mean,
right, he was a brilliant guy.
You're absolutely right, but he
worked.
wrecked the city. I mean, 100,000 people left Washington while he was mayor. While he was mayor, 41% of all African-American men were either in jail, out on bail, or wanted. Total in the city. That's not a good outcome. That's not impressive. He did not make the city better. You know that. You lived here. Why would you ever put a statue to that guy?
Let's not forget that when he came in, the city was a mess. When he came in as mayor, the first 3 years that he came in, they had a $13 million surplus. When he came in, actually, if you look at the numbers, and you can look it up online, when he came in, he straightened the city out. Now, what happened in the 80s and the crack epidemic of the 80s was not the fault of Marion Barry.
But he was a crackhead himself. I mean, he got busted smoking crack on camera. Then he got busted again, as you know.
Yes, he did.
Using drugs. Look, there are a lot of decent people who fall into drug addiction, but he was a crack smoker at the height of the crack epidemic. I mean, that's the definition of bad leadership.
He was a man who did get in trouble, but all of the things that he did were things that damaged him. He did a number of good things for the city and the people in the city of Washington.
He went to jail and got busted for having sex with a woman in the visiting room. He couldn't even spend 6 months in jail without getting in trouble.
As I said, the things that he did were things that hurt him. But additionally, he put together a program where all young children in Washington, or all school-age people in Washington, D.C. who wanted a summer job would have a summer job. When he came in, African Americans were getting none of the contracts from the city, and he said they've got to get at least 30.
So do you think it's meaningful that 41% of all black men in the entire District of Columbia were in jail, on parole, or wanted by the police in the city run by Marion Barry? You can't say it was racial animus. He was running the city.
Right, but we can't say it was his fault. I mean,
you can't look at that and say, look, he advanced the cause of African Americans when 100,000 people left. A lot of them black. The black middle class left the city and went to Maryland.
You know what's interesting about that? So when he came in, he said he was going to build a black middle class, and in fact he did. But one of the consequences of him building a black middle class...
No, he didn't. The federal government built the middle class.
One of the consequences of what he did was there are a lot of black middle-class people who lived in poor neighborhoods in the city, and when they started making more money, they moved out to the county and bought nice homes. So the fact that a lot of black people left the city wasn't because it was worse.
Well, that's not true. The schools were terrible, and no normal person with an option would ever keep his kids here. I mean, look, by basic measures, the city got worse. That's just true. Look, I think Barry was a complicated guy, an interesting guy. But for Washington, he wasn't good, and nobody really thinks that. Let me ask you this, though, since we're now evaluating everybody by our current standards. Barry was the only member of the city council to come out against gay marriage.
Right.
You're okay with that?
Well, let's not forget, back then, when we talk about long ago, look what happened. Barack Obama, a guy who started off. The Clintons way back signed
No, you don't. Wait, no, but hold on. You don't know the rules.
No,
the
my
rules
point,
are that you evaluate historic figures on the basis of your current moral values.
My point is, at the time he did it, that wasn't all unusual. And actually, afterwards, he said that if a bill came down and he was mayor, that he would sign it.
Okay, but by that standard, then none of the historical figures whose statues are being pulled down should be held to modern standards.
Well, it depends on what it depends.
What do you mean it depends? Look, this is insane.
No, it's not. Oh, so here's a guy who was with the student nonviolent coordinating committee, right? And it sounds like you're getting at, you know, the Robert E. Lee statues. Well, I don't think you can compare him with people who took up arms against the United States, unless we're going to give Bo Bergdahl a statue.
I'm just saying that you and I both know the truth, which is the only reason you would put Marion Barry's statue up is to give the finger to certain people in the city who hated him because he hated them and said so out loud. This guy was an open race baiter, and I'm not sure why we're giving him a pass on that. Again, I liked him. He had dinner at my house. But I'm just being honest.
Right.
He divided this city by race. You know that he did. And that's his chief appeal. Why would we want to keep doing that?
So I would argue that he didn't divide the city by race. I would argue that he came in at a time in America where the nation was divided by race, and he did everything that he could to bring it together.
Oh, really? Well, so when you say, we've got to do something about these Asians coming in, they're dirty shops, they ought to go. Is that bringing us together based on race?
My point is, you cannot evaluate the man based on a single statement that he walked back later and apologized for.
How about white people get over it?
Well, there's nothing wrong with saying that. If he felt as though white people were freaked out because there was a black mayor, there's nothing wrong with
generalizing? Really? Come on, that's insane. You can't generalize on the basis of race, because that's inherently divisive, because not everyone who looks the same has the same opinion.
But you can't divide a man. I mean, you can't take a man who lived 80 years old, who was a principal figure in the civil rights movement, and say, well, he made 2 statements, so we got to drop all of the rest of the stuff that he did.
He made a lot more than 2. The bitch set me up, for example. Look, if they put the Barry statue up, do you mind if I cover it with a sheet, just so my sensibilities aren't offended?
I got a problem with that. But, you know, if you can get away with it, good luck.
I can't.
The Metro Police might grab you. But,
yeah, I think they would. Garland Nixon, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Well, the new CEO of the Podesta Group is abandoning that company after just 2 weeks. Why could that be happening? Why the sudden flight away from the Podesta Group? We'll talk to an expert on the shady side of Washington business. Coming up. Well, you could have predicted this. It's every man for himself. The Podesta Group. 2 weeks ago, co-founder Tony Podesta stepped down from the company after sending us a letter threatening to sue us for mentioning his name on TV. There was speculation he could soon be indicted by the independent counsel, Robert Mueller. We're waiting to see if that's going to happen. Now Podesta's successor, Kimberly Fritz, has announced she is quitting to start her own firm. We were the first to report that the Podesta Group was at the center of Mueller's investigation after a source told us about the company's multi-year effort to lobby on behalf of foreign powers, including Russia-backed Ukrainian figures, without disclosing its status as a foreign agent, which it certainly was. Peter Schweitzer wrote the book Clinton Cash. He's an expert on Washington corruption and backroom dealing. He joins us tonight. Peter, are you surprised that the Podesta Group's revenues dropped dramatically after Hillary lost? Do you think there was a connection?
Yes, absolutely. Huge connection, because lobbying is ultimately about access. You know, lobbyists will tell you, Tucker, you've heard it a million times, as have I, no, we're really hired for our expertise.
Right.
That's simply not the case. It's about access. So, yeah, the revenue is drying up, but there's also major legal problems that the Podesta Group is facing. And I think Fritz made a very reasonable decision to abandon ship.
So if you were one of Mueller's investigators, how would you be thinking about the Podesta Group? What would you be looking at?
Well, you'd be looking at a couple of things. First of all, the Podesta Group, really over the course of almost the last calendar year, has been amending their filings in Washington, D.C., their lobbying records with the federal government. There's something called the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA,
right,
set up in the 1930s, basically to counteract Nazi propaganda efforts in the United States. If you do work for a foreign political party or a foreign government, you're required to disclose that and register it. The Podesta Group did not on numerous occasions, not just related to Ukraine. And so they've been amending those filings over the last year. It's a little bit too little, too late. So they're going to face some real challenges there, particularly because now we know that this is what Paul Manafort is being charged with.
Right.
If they're going to be consistent, you're charging Manafort, you're going to have to charge Podesta as well.
You certainly think so.
Those are the kinds of things you're looking for.
So, but I don't understand. So you're required by federal law to register if you're lobbying on behalf of a foreign government. But then the Podesta Group never bothered to do that. And then years later, after the group on whose behalf they were working disbanded, doesn't even exist anymore, they register retroactively? How is that legal? Can I do that with my taxes?
It'd be great if we could, isn't it, Tucker? I mean, look, here's the issue. The foreign governments will try, as in the case of the Ukraine, for example, they'll funnel it through a third party. There was this European Ukrainian foundation that the Ukrainian government, Yanukovych government, funded, and then they paid. That doesn't change the fact that the government paid for it. So they are trying now to, in a sense, cover up the fact and say, no, it was foreign registration. We're now complying with the law. This is not a law that, unfortunately, has been enforced all that much in the past. I think that's a huge mistake. In the case of Manafort and in the case of Podesta, we ought to enforce those laws because these laws require greater disclosure. If you're lobbying for a foreign government, you're required to say who you met with specifically, on what date, exactly what you talked about. And we deserve, as citizens, to know who these hired guns are when they're working for foreign governments.
The most powerful lobbies in Washington are not registered under FARA. And I find it a little bit disingenuous. You see these members of Congress jumping up and down about how the Russians hacked our election and foreigners are really determining the course of our democracy, and yet they're not even enforcing the laws on the books. Why is that?
That's a great point, and that's I think one of the real problems in Washington D.C. Tucker, you and I have talked about it for years. Business as usual in Washington oftentimes spills over into frankly illegal activity.
Yeah,
and they don't want to police themselves, and it's time for that to change. And people like Trump, people don't like Trump. The fact of the matter is the disruptive effect of Trump coming into Washington is a lot of these issues are being exposed and should be exposed, and hopefully we're going to start using the teeth of the law to bite into some of these people. That needs to be done.
That's exactly right. Let's take this Russia thing seriously. You say a foreign government is influencing policies in the United States. Okay, let's take a close look at which foreign governments are doing that. No one wants to do that, I notice. Peter, thank you very much for your expertise on this.
Thanks, Tucker.
Better. Well, there's been an avalanche of sex scandals from Alabama to Hollywood. We'll discuss the very latest depressing developments on that next. Some have implications. Well, there's been a wave of sex scandals across the country. In politics, Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore is denying everything. He's rejecting reports that he pursued inappropriate relationships with several teenage girls, including a 14-year-old back in the late 70s. Meanwhile, comedian Louis C.K. is admitting to everything. He acknowledges he engaged in lewd behavior with several women. He's apologized for that. Meanwhile, professional enabler Lisa Bloom, ambulance chaser if there ever was one, allegedly tried to silence and discredit the victims of Harvey Weinstein. She's making a half-hearted effort to apologize and make it go away. Here's what she said.
Let me say, I very much regret ever being involved in this. I'm mortified that I was connected with him in any way. And all the people who have reached out to me to say, Lisa, you know, we're hurt, we're disappointed in you. Like, I get it, and I'm very, very sorry. I will tell you that when the sexual assault allegations came out, it was absolutely devastating to read those stories of all those women who went on the record with those stories for the first time. And I've represented women like that for 31 years. I still do. I know the courage that it takes. And I was just shocked, I think like we all were.
That's a lie, by the way. She was paid cash money to discredit those accusers. And the question is she going to return the money? How much was she paid? Single most disingenuous television appearance of the year, and that's saying a lot. Well, it's no surprise that the LAPD has formed a special task force to investigate sex crimes in Hollywood. Tammy Bruce is a radio show host, and she joins us tonight. So, Tammy, there are a couple different tracks here. First, to the Roy Moore story. I read the story in the Washington Post, a paper I never read. And, you know, some of it sounds true to me, actually. I mean, some of the women may dislike him politically. One of them is a Trump voter. You know, people on the record with no obvious political animus. The problem is that I think a lot of other people so distrust the media that even when maybe what they're reporting is correct, it's hard to know exactly. And maybe that's one of the costs of the press just abandoning objectivity completely. Nobody believes anything anymore.
Yeah, that's their abandonment of their responsibility and their duty, and it's happened clearly over a period of actually a couple of decades. You could even argue all the way back to Walter Cronkite and the misleading regarding the Vietnam War. That's what we're hearing, and that's what I'm seeing in social media and the larger discussions, is that the voters there really think it is another establishment hit job. If there's any kind of question, they don't trust the media, and so they dismiss it in that fashion as well. And then, of course, the Washington Post has been really exclusively political. They endorsed, of course, the Democrat. They are obviously very against the president and Republicans. So they've been very politically active. They don't have, I think, the credibility of being just reporters and people who report the news. So it's very much like a political blog.
It's a shame. It's a shame because I thought their story sounded credible to me. I don't have any other information, but if you took the Washington Post off it, I would think that's, you know, you got women on the record. I take that seriously, and I think that's horrible, disqualifying behavior if true. But the fact the Post printed it, this just shows that when you devalue your credibility over a period of time, there's a cost to that.
And not just that, though, but also what we've seen over a period of time when it comes to what accusations are made, and sometimes serious accusations made on an important issue and used like a political cudgel. So, you know, we see what's going on in Hollywood, and people see patterns when it comes to sexual predators. And if this is true regarding Judge Moore, then he would be a predator, and we would see more accusations. And this is why this weekend is important. But normally, normally what you see, because this is like potato chips. You don't do just one, right? You have these patterns of a number of women over a period of years, similar actions, and the ubiquitous everybody knows, right? We don't see that at this point with Judge Moore, and this is also why people are questioning it, because it seems to be so out of character. We will learn more over the weekend, but ultimately the voters of Alabama will decide. Yeah. But we all need to kind of go home and bathe in Purell when it comes to what the news of the day has been lately.
It's disgusting, and I'm fascinated not just by the perpetrators of some of these apparent crimes, but by the people who knew and didn't say anything. So in the case of Louis C.K., who seems like a pretty troubled guy, to put it mildly, Jon Stewart was asked last year, he was doing an interview with David Axelrod, I think at the University of Chicago, and he was asked pretty directly about this and laughed.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about that. You know, what are you talking about? It sounds like everybody knew a lot about it. Is Jon Stewart, is that credible that he didn't know this? Why would he laugh about that?
You know, I think that sometimes you can be conveniently ignorant, or you pretend you don't know. It's like O.J. Simpson is maybe still looking for the real killers, and you can convince yourself. But over a year and a half ago, about a year and a half ago, Roseanne Barr, the comedian Roseanne Barr, gave an interview where she was very specific about Louis C.K. and said, that guy's a problem. Look at this guy. This is an issue. And nobody cared, Tucker. And now we do know, of course, that everybody does know. But these are individuals who make a lot of money for people, their agents and their managers, people that work in productions involved with them. So and this is why when the LAPD or the district attorney in LA says they're starting up a task force, you have to laugh, because it's the Hollywood industry that are their major donors, that no one there is objective when it comes to making decisions about what needs to happen here. Maybe the federal government, not that we trust them a great deal, needs to act, but certainly Los Angeles, the politicians in California are the last people we should look to for justice in this regard.
There are a lot of people in television and politics and entertainment who are really creepy in their personal lives and just weird and unhappy, and maybe we can do a segment next week about why that is. It's an interesting. I mean, have you noticed this? You've been around this stuff your whole life.
Yes.
It's not a cross-section of America. Yeah. It's like all the weird people wound up in front of cameras. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I grew up in it, and I don't use the word victim a lot, but it was a victim to some degree of this dynamic. So there's a lot going on, and yeah, I'd like to explore that with you.
It would be fun. Tammy Bruce, thank you. Great to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Well, a college professor says mass shootings from Orlando to Las Vegas have a shared origin: the toxic masculinity of their perpetrators. What does that mean? And are you suffering from it? Could you die from toxic masculinity? A segment you must see for medical reasons. Coming up. Devin Kelly was a violent, unstable, mentally ill person. He savagely beat his wife and stepson. He killed animals, tortured them. He decided to shoot up a church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. It was a horrifying decision, but probably not that surprising. Some people are unsatisfied with that explanation, though. Just because he was deranged doesn't mean that's why he did it. Well, Drexel professor George Ciarello-Marr says that a key cause of the attack is Kelly's race. In a radio interview, the professor said that, quote, whiteness has a, quote, institutional apparatus that encourages white men to feel as though they're on the losing side of history. That makes them feel like victims and causes them to, quote, lash out by committing mass murder. Huh. It's a strange claim, but the really strange thing is how this same professor explains blame. Keep in mind, we've had him on the show, and he's the one who just last year tweeted out he was hoping for white genocide for Christmas, espousing violence himself. Huh. We'll hope he'll come back to explain. Not everybody thinks race is what causes shootings. Some think it's gender that does it. A professor at Kutztown University in the state of Pennsylvania says the biggest thing to blame for the spate of mass shootings we've seen recently is something called toxic masculinity. Colleen Clemens teaches women's and gender studies, needless to say, and shortly after the Sutherland Springs shootings tweeted this, quote, toxic masculinity is killing everyone. Repeat, toxic masculinity is killing everyone. Repeat, toxic masculinity is killing everyone. Repeat, we could go on, but there are only a certain number of characters allowed in a tweet. Kathy Aru is the founding publisher of Catalina Magazine. She joins us tonight. So, Kathy, we asked the professor to come on. She sent us a very long and actually very nice email saying that she feared for her safety and couldn't come on. Oh. You were brave enough to do so. Tell us, if you would, if you know the answer, what is toxic masculinity? How do you catch it? What's the cure?
Well, according to the professor's article, toxic masculinity is the man's fear that he's losing his power. And because minorities and women are taking higher positions and they have more power, that white men and men in general are afraid that they're going to lose their strength and their virility, and therefore they are causing the mass shootings and lashing out.
Well, so it's kind of both ways. So what you have is a situation where the entire kind of fashionable culture in America attacks one group relentlessly. And then if they don't like it, that's a problem too. And then if there's a shooting committed by someone who looks that way, that's the result of them. I mean, this is kind of a nonsense theory, isn't it? Maybe the guy committed a mass shooting because he was crazy or he had some kind of other animus. Does it have to be because of his gender?
Yes. I mean, if you look at it, yes, men are more violent than women. Of the mass shootings we've had in the last 25 years, 88 have been by men, 2 have been by women. So we definitely have a problem with men in this country. Men are committing the murders.
Okay, well that is true. Of course, men commit the overwhelming majority of violent crimes. But I thought men and women were exactly the same. I mean, I'm kind of losing track of my feminist orthodoxies here, and I think some of them may be on a collision course about to hit each other. So men and women are exactly the same. You can transition from one to the other by snapping your fingers, and everyone has to believe that that's real. But they're totally different, which is true.
Women are better, unfortunately. We are not the murderers of our society. We are not committing the crimes. We commit less than 20% of the crimes. So that's actually, men are not as good as women. We are actually better. We're safer.
But what about men who transition to it? So if a man says, if he's got the terrible case of toxic masculinity,
yes,
he's on his deathbed dying from toxic masculinity,
right,
and he says, bam, I'm a woman now. Does it cure him?
Well, I would hope so. He would be the better gender, so I would hope so.
Okay. Does any of this strike you as nuts, or are you actually kind of tracking with this and nodding in agreement?
No, I completely agree. If you look at it, it doesn't matter what race they are, doesn't matter where they're from, doesn't matter what country. Men are committing most of the crimes and most of the murders. There is a problem with men, and no one can quite figure it out. Is it the testosterone? Is it that they feel less empowered? Are the minorities, are the women taking over too much, and they are afraid of this? Is
there an upside to masculinity? So let's say a hostile power tries to invade the country and, burn your house and kill the livestock and carry your women off over their shoulder or whatever. That's the point when you'd want to have some toxic masculinity around, right?
Well,
actually, it's funny. I actually have 2 cadets from West Point in my studio right now watching. And I asked them in the commercial break, I hope you guys have a lot of toxic masculinity, because the whole point is to go kill people in order to protect